The day I turned 50 felt like a punch I didn't see coming. It was a warm spring afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low and golden, promising something better than what you've got. I stood in our backyard, flipping burgers on the grill, the sizzle and smoke filling the air while laughter and chatter buzzed around me like a swarm I wasn't part of. My wife had planned the whole thing, a big party, she called it, to celebrate half a century of me. But as I pressed a spatula against the meat, watching grease drip into the flames, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't for me. It was for them. The friends, the neighbors, my brother-in-law who always had a jab ready, my kids who barely looked up from their phones anymore. They were all here, eating my food, drinking my beer, while I played the part of the good host, the quiet provider, the man who never complained. I caught a glimpse of her across the yard, holding court with her friends, her laugh sharp and bright like it always was when she had an audience. She'd spent weeks planning this, texting everyone, ordering decorations, making sure the playlist was just right. I'd offered to help, but she waved me off, saying she had it handled. That was her way, taking charge, making things look perfect, while I stayed in the background, paying for it all. The caterer, the extra chairs, the cake that probably cost more than my old truck's worth. I didn't mind at first. I never did. It's what you do when you love someone, right? You carry the weight so they can shine. But lately, that weight had started to feel like a chain. The kids were there too, Corey, 22, leaning against the fence with his buddies, tossing back a beer like he was too grown to check in with his old man, and Mia, 19, snapping selfies with her friends, her smile as bright as her mother's. They used to run to me when they were little, arms wide, shouting "Daddy," like I was the center of their world. Now I was lucky to get a nod or a half-hearted thanks when I handed over cash for gas or tuition. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that they'd come around. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were all gathered around the picnic table, plates piled high with food I'd cooked, when she stood up, holding something behind her back. "Everyone, listen up," she called, her voice cutting through the noise like a bell. The crowd hushed, all eyes on her. She stepped toward me, a grin on her face, and pulled out a glittery paper crown, the kind you'd see at a kid's birthday party. The words "King of Letdowns and Disappointments" were scrawled across it in bold, black marker. She held it up like a trophy, and the yard erupted in laughter. My kids cracked up, Corey slapping the table, Mia covering her mouth like she couldn't believe it. My brother-in-law let out a loud, "Oh man, that's perfect," and the rest of the guests followed, their chuckles piling on like stones. "It's just a joke, babe," she said, plopping the crown on my head. "You know we love you." I forced a smile, the kind that hurts your face, and nodded. "Yeah, hilarious," I said, my voice steady even though something inside me was cracking. I kept the crown on, let them take their pictures, let them have their fun. But every laugh felt like a needle, every clap on the back like a shove. I stood there, grilling more burgers, pouring more drinks, while they toasted to me, or maybe to the idea of me, the guy who always showed up, always paid, always took it on the chin. The party went on until the sun dipped below the trees, leaving the yard bathed in a soft orange glow. People started to leave, tossing "great party" and "happy birthday" over their shoulders as they headed to their cars. I cleaned up alone, stacking plates, tossing cans into the recycling, wiping down tables while the house grew quiet. My wife was inside, probably scrolling through her phone, posting pictures of the perfect day. The kids had vanished, Corey to some bar with his friends, Mia upstairs with her earbuds in. I was left with the mess, the crown still sitting on the table where I'd dropped it, glitter smudged from my hands. I sat on the back porch, the air cool now, the stars starting to poke through the sky. The house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room window. I thought about the last 20 years, working overtime to keep the lights on, driving the kids to soccer and band practice, fixing leaks, signing checks, swallowing every slight and smirk because that's what a man does. I thought about that crown, those words. King of Letdowns and Disappointments. A joke, sure, but it wasn't funny. It was true. Not because I'd failed them, but because I'd let myself disappear. I'd let them make me invisible and I'd smiled through it. I pulled out my phone, the screen's light harsh against the night. My fingers moved almost on their own, opening a travel app one hadn't used in years. I didn't think too hard about it, didn't let myself overthink. I typed in a destination, any destination, and found a flight leaving tomorrow morning. One way, no return. I booked it, my heart pounding like I was doing something illegal. Then I went inside, grabbed a notepad from the kitchen drawer, and wrote a note. Simple, No explanations, no apologies. Just, I'm leaving. I need time. Don't look for me. I left it on the counter, next to the sink full of dishes I wouldn't wash. Upstairs, I packed a small bag, just a few clothes, my wallet, my old pocket knife, and the dog's leash because I wasn't leaving Max behind. Everyone was asleep, the house heavy with their breathing. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the closed doors, the life I'd built, the life I'd let myself drown in. Then I walked out, Max trotting beside me, and shut the door quietly behind us. No shouting, no slamming, no big scene. Just me, stepping out of my own life, into the dark where nobody could laugh at me anymore. I stepped off the bus in Marlow Ridge just as the sun was breaking through the morning fog, painting the hills in shades of gold and gray. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without someone waiting to interrupt me. Max, my old dog, trotted beside me, his leash loose in my hand, his nose twitching at every new smell. The town was small, barely a blip on a map, with a main street that looked like it hadn't changed since I'd passed through on a business trip a decade ago. I remembered a diner with warm cobbler and a bookstore that smelled like old paper. That's why I picked this place. No one knew me here, and I didn't owe anyone a smile or an explanation. I wasn't sure where to start, so I walked, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder, Max's nails clicking on the sidewalk. The streets were quiet, just a few early risers, a woman watering flowers outside a hardware store, a guy unloading crates at a market. Nobody stared or asked questions, and that alone felt like a gift. Back home, every move I made came with someone's opinion, my wife's voice telling me I was doing it wrong, my kids rolling their eyes, my brother-in-law's smirk when he thought he'd one-upped me. Here, I was just a guy with a dog, blending into the morning like I belonged. I found the bookstore I'd remembered, tucked between a barber shop and a thrift store. Its sign read Russell's Pages, the letters faded but proud. The window was stacked with old novels and a couple of dusty lamps, and a handwritten note taped to the glass said, "Room for rent, inquire within." I pushed open the door, a bell jingling softly, and stepped into a warm, cluttered space that smelled of leather and ink. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed tight with books, some spilling onto the floor in neat piles. An older man with gray hair and a flannel shirt sat behind the counter, reading a paperback. He looked up, nodded once, and went back to his book like I wasn't worth a second thought. I like that. I cleared my throat. Saw your sign about the room. He marked his page, set the book down, and sized me up, not suspicious, just curious in a quiet way. "Name's Russell," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. I told him I was looking for a place to stay, maybe for a while, and that I had a dog who wouldn't cause trouble. Max wagged his tail like he was backing me up. Russell didn't ask for a life story, didn't pry about why a guy my age was showing up with just a bag and a mutt. He just nodded and said, "Room's upstairs. Small, but clean. 100 a week, cash up front. Dog's fine as long as he doesn't chew my books." I handed over the money, and that was that. No forms, no questions, just a key and a chance to start over. The room was on the second floor, up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. It wasn't much, a single bed with a faded quilt, a dresser with a chipped mirror, a desk by a window that looked out over the hills. A tiny bathroom was down the hall, shared with nobody since Russell lived in a house nearby. I dropped my bag on the floor, let Max sniff around, and sat on the bed, the springs groaning under my weight. For a moment, I just listened to the silence. No phone buzzing with demands, no voices calling me to fix something, no laughter that cut deeper than it should. Just the soft hum of the world outside and Max's quiet breathing as he curled up at my feet. I didn't shave that first day, didn't bother trying to look presentable. Back home, I'd kept myself neat, hair trimmed, shirts pressed, because that's what you do when you're trying to hold everything together. But here, I let my face stay rough, let my shoulders slouch. I walked to the diner I'd remembered, a place called Rosie's with checkered curtains and a neon sign that flickered. The cobbler was as good as I'd recalled, warm and sweet, the crust flaky under my fork. I ate slowly, watching the locals, loggers in worn jackets, a couple of retirees arguing about baseball, a waitress who called everyone Han without sounding fake. Nobody knew I'd walked away from my life, and I didn't feel the need to tell them. That night, I pulled a notebook from my bag, one I'd grabbed on impulse before leaving. It was blank, just waiting for something to fill it. I sat at the desk, the lamp casting a soft glow, and started writing. Not a letter, not a plan, just everything. The years of working double shifts so we could afford the house. The times I'd stayed up late fixing Corey's bike or Mia's laptop because they needed them for school. The vacations I'd paid for but barely enjoyed, always on edge, making sure everyone else was happy. The birthday crown, those words, king of letdowns and disappointments, burned into my mind like a brand. I wrote about the silence, too, the kind I'd swallowed every time someone dismissed me, mocked me, took me for granted. Page after page, the words came, messy and raw, like I was emptying a drawer I'd kept locked too long. I didn't sleep much that first week, but it wasn't because I was restless. It was because I was awake, really awake, for the first time in years. I walked the hills with Max, letting the fog dampen my jacket, listening to the crunch of leaves under my boots. I'd stop at the diner for coffee, nod to Russell when I passed him in the shop, read whatever book I pulled off his shelves. I started to notice things, the way the light hit the mountains at dawn, the way Max's ears perked when he heard a squirrel, the way my hands didn't shake anymore when I poured my coffee. I wasn't running from my life, not exactly. I was finding one I'd forgotten I could have. By the 7th day, I'd filled half the notebook, my handwriting tighter, sharper, like I was carving out something solid. I didn't know what I'd do with it. Maybe burn it, maybe keep it, but it felt like proof. Proof I'd been there, proof I'd carried more than anyone saw, proof I wasn't the failure they'd laughed about. I sealed it in a drawer, locked it with the key Russell gave me, and let it sit. For now, I was here, in this quiet town, with a dog who didn't care about my mistakes and a room that didn't ask me to be anyone but myself. And that was enough. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my room above the bookstore, casting soft shadows on the worn wooden floor. I was sitting at the desk, a mug of coffee gone cold in my hand, staring out at the hills when my phone buzzed, a rare sound since I'd arrived in Marlow Ridge. I'd kept it on mostly for emergencies, not expecting anyone to reach out, but the name on the screen caught me off guard. Dave, an old colleague from the office I hadn't spoken to in years. His message was short, just a few words that hit like a stone. Did you see what she posted? I didn't need to ask who he meant. My stomach tightened, not out of fear, but out of something heavier, curiosity mixed with dread. I hadn't looked at anything from back home since I left, hadn't wanted to. But now, sitting in this quiet space I'd started to call mine, I felt a pull to know. I didn't have my old accounts anymore, deleted them the night I booked the bus ticket, wanting a clean break. But I wasn't stupid. I knew how easy it was to see things without leaving a trace. I grabbed my laptop, an old one I'd brought along, and set up a burner account, just a random name and no picture. It took less than a minute to find her profile, the one she updated religiously with photos of vacations I'd paid for and dinners I'd cooked. There it was, pinned at the top, a post from a few days ago. Her words were bold, dramatic, like she was auditioning for a role. If anyone sees my husband, please tell him we're sorry. We miss him. We didn't realize what we had. Below it, a picture of us from last Christmas. Me in the background, carrying a tray of food, her and the kids smiling front and center. I stared at it, my chest tight, not because I missed them, but because I saw it for what it was, a performance. I scrolled through the comments, each one a little stab. People I hadn't talked to in years were chiming in, their sympathy dripping like syrup. He always seemed so kind, one wrote, as if they'd ever bothered to know me. You never know what someone's going through, another added, like I was some mystery they'd just discovered. Then I saw my brother-in-law's name, his words standing out like a billboard. He's a good man. We messed up. I leaned back in the chair, letting out a slow breath. Good man. Funny how he never said that when he was laughing at my expense, borrowing my tools without asking, or poking fun at my job like it was beneath him. I kept reading, watching the likes pile up, the shares spreading her plea like wildfire. It wasn't an apology. It was a spotlight, and she was basking in it. I closed the laptop, my hands steady but my mind racing. Part of me wanted to type something back, to call it out for what it was, her way of making herself the victim while I stayed the ghost. But I didn't. I'd spent 20 years reacting, fixing, smoothing things over. This time, I'd let them sit in it. I got up, clipped Max's leash on, and headed out for a walk, needing the air to clear my head. The town was waking up, shopkeepers flipping signs to open, a delivery truck rumbling down the street. I passed Rosie's diner, the smell of bacon drifting out, but I kept going, my boots crunching on the gravel path that led into the hills. Max trotted ahead, chasing a leaf that skittered in the breeze, and I envied how easy it was for him to just exist. As I walked, I thought about that post, those comments, The way they all acted like they'd lost something precious. I wasn't blind. I knew they missed the things I did, the bills I paid, the problems I solved. But me? The guy who'd sat through their jokes, who'd stayed up late balancing the checkbook, who'd worn that stupid crown and laughed it off. They didn't know him. They didn't want to. I stopped at a clearing, the valley stretching out below, fog still clinging to the trees like a blanket. I sat on a rock, Max flopping down beside me, and pulled out the notebook I'd been writing in since I got here. It was becoming a habit, putting it all down, every slight, every sacrifice, every moment I'd let slide because I thought that's what love meant. I wrote about the post, about how it wasn't regret but exposure. They weren't sorry, they were caught, scrambling to look good now that I wasn't there to hold it together. I wrote about the Christmas picture, how I'd been in the background my whole life, serving, waiting, hoping someone would notice. I filled pages, my pen digging into the paper until my hand cramped and the words blurred. It wasn't anger driving me, not exactly. It was clarity, sharp and cold, like the mountain air. I didn't need their apologies. I needed to keep seeing things as they were, not as I'd wished them to be. When I got back to the bookstore, Russell was sweeping the front steps, his broom scraping softly against the stone. He glanced up, gave a nod, and went back to work. I liked that about him, no small talk, no need to fill the silence. I climbed the stairs to my room, Max trailing behind, and sat at the desk again. I opened the laptop, looked at her post one more time. The comments had grown, more people piling on with their pity, their guesses about where I'd gone. I didn't read them all. I didn't need to. I logged out, shut the screen, and leaned back, the chair creaking under me. I thought about replying not to her, not to them, but to myself. Maybe I'd write it in the notebook later, something to mark this moment, to say I'd seen their game and chosen not to play. But for now, I let it go. I wasn't ready to answer, wasn't ready to step back into their world. I got up, poured some kibble for Max, and grabbed a book from the stack Russell had let me borrow, a worn-out mystery novel, the kind I used to read before life got too loud. I sat by the window, the hills turning purple as the sun dipped low, and read until the words felt like my own. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me who I was. I was just here, watching, listening, letting the truth settle like dust after a storm. The fog was thick that morning in Marlow Ridge, wrapping the town in a quiet so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. I was sitting at the desk in my room above the bookstore, Max snoring softly by the heater, when I decided it was time to act, not out of anger, but out of a need to draw a line. I'd been in this town for a couple of weeks now, letting the silence and the hills soak into me, but seeing that post online a few days ago had stirred something. It wasn't enough to just walk away. I wanted them to feel the weight of what I'd carried all those years, to see what happened when I stopped holding it up. I wanted clarity, not the loud, messy kind of revenge you see in movies, but something sharper, something that would last. I started with the practical stuff, the things I'd always handled without a second thought. I pulled out my phone and called Owen, our financial advisor, a guy I'd known since we bought the house. He picked up on the second ring, his voice cautious but familiar. "Hey, good to hear from you," he said, like he wasn't sure if I was okay. I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him I needed to untangle myself from everything. Joint accounts, savings, credit cards, all of it. I wanted my name off anything that tied me to her, to them. There was a pause. Then he asked if I was sure, his tone careful, like he thought I might be losing it. I said I'd never been surer. I could almost hear him nodding through the phone as he promised to get it done, no questions asked. That's what I liked about Owen, he didn't push. Next, I called the bank. It took longer, wading through automated menus and explaining to a bored-sounding clerk what I wanted. I stopped automatic payments for the mortgage, the utilities, the internet, everything I'd been footing for years. I didn't cancel them outright. I just made sure they'd have to figure it out without me. The clerk asked if I was moving, and I said something vague about simplifying my life. She didn't care enough to press, and I didn't care enough to explain. By the time I hung up, my hands were steady, my pulse calm. It felt like shedding a coat I'd worn too long, one that never fit right but I'd gotten used to. I didn't stop there. I called my lawyer, not the one we'd use for the house, but a guy I'd met through work years ago, someone who owed me a favor. I told him I wanted to change my will, make sure my assets went where I chose, not where habit had landed them. He said he'd need time to draft it, but I could tell he understood this wasn't a whim. I hung up feeling lighter, like I'd taken back a piece of myself I'd given away without noticing. Every call, Every step was a brick pulled from the foundation I'd built for them. I didn't want it to crumble, not out of spite, but I wanted them to see the cracks, to know I'd been the one keeping it together. That afternoon, I walked to Rosie's diner, Max trotting beside me, the fog lifting enough to show the hills in soft outline. I ordered coffee and a slice of cobbler, sitting at the counter where I could watch the world without being part of it. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that said Darlene, refilled my mug without asking, her smile easy but not pushy. I liked that about this place. Nobody expected you to perform. I sipped the coffee, letting it burn my tongue just enough to keep me sharp, and thought about what I'd done. It wasn't about hurting them, though I knew it would sting. It was about consequences, about letting them live in the world they'd taken for granted. By evening, the fallout started. My phone lit up with texts, one after another, like sparks from a fire I'd set and walked away from. They were from her, of course, short at first, then longer, sharper. The heater wasn't working. The credit card got declined at the grocery store. Mia's tuition payment didn't go through, and the school sent a notice. Each message was a demand, a plea, a jab, all at once. What's going on? Why aren't you answering? This isn't fair to the kids. I read them, one by one, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could picture her in the kitchen, pacing, her voice rising like it always did when things didn't go her way. I could imagine Corey and Mia watching, maybe confused, maybe angry, maybe starting to wonder why I wasn't there to fix it. I didn't reply. I set the phone face down on the desk, the buzz fading into the hum of the room. Max lifted his head, his ears perked, like he sensed something shifting. I scratched behind his ears, his fur warm under my fingers, and felt a quiet settle over me. I wasn't ignoring them to be cruel. I was done jumping when they snapped their fingers, done being the guy who made it all okay while they laughed at my expense. I opened my notebook, the one I'd been filling with everything I'd kept inside, and wrote about today, about the calls, the texts, the choices I'd made. I wrote about how it felt to say no, not with words, but with action. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was mine. Later, I walked downstairs to the bookstore, where Russell was sorting a box of old paperbacks. He glanced up, his eyes catching mine for a second, like he knew something was different but didn't care enough to ask. "Coffee's on," he said, nodding toward a pot in the corner. I poured a cup, the steam curling in the cool air, and stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The town was quiet, just a few cars rolling by, their headlights cutting through the dusk. I thought about home, not the house I'd left, but the life I'd let myself lose. I'd spent years thinking love meant giving everything, taking nothing, staying silent. But standing here, with a coffee I didn't know anyone, in a town that didn't demand my name, I started to see it differently. I went back upstairs, Max following, his tail wagging like he approved of whatever I was doing. I sat at the desk again, the notebook open, the pen heavy in my hand. I didn't write this time, just stared at the pages, the words I'd poured out, the truth I'd finally let myself see. My phone buzzed again, another message I didn't read. I turned it off, set it in the drawer, and closed it tight. For now, I was done listening to their noise. I'd made my move, not to destroy, but to build something new, something true, something that didn't ask me to disappear. I was sitting on the steps outside Rosie's diner, the morning air cool and sharp, when the envelope arrived. Max was sprawled beside me, his head resting on my knee, while I sipped coffee from a chipped mug, watching the town wake up. A delivery truck rattled past, and a couple of kids biked down the street, their laughter fading into the hills. I'd started to find a rhythm here in Marlow Ridge. Coffee at the diner, walks with Max, evenings scribbling in my notebook, but that rhythm broke when Russell shuffled up, holding a plain white envelope with my name scrawled on it. He handed it over without a word, just a quick nod, and headed back to the bookstore. I turned it over, saw the return address, a law firm from back home, and felt my stomach twist. I knew what this was before I opened it. I slid my thumb under the flap, careful not to tear it, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The words were cold, formal, like they'd been written by someone who didn't know me. My wife was filing for separation, claiming emotional abandonment, demanding alimony. She said I'd contributed nothing for years, that I'd left her and the kids with no support, no warning. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because the absurdity of it hit me like a bad joke. Nothing? 20 years of paychecks, late nights, and quiet sacrifices, and she called it nothing. I let out a laugh, sharp, bitter, the kind that surprises you, and Max lifted his head. His ears perked like he was waiting for an explanation. I didn't have one, not for him or myself. I tucked the letter into my jacket and walked back to the bookstore, my boots heavy on the pavement. The hills were turning gold under the rising sun, but I barely noticed. My mind was spinning, not with anger, though there was plenty of that, but with a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. This wasn't just her trying to hurt me. It was her rewriting the story, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain who'd walked away for no reason. I climbed the stairs to my room, Max trailing behind, and sat at the desk, the envelope staring up at me like a challenge. I could have called her, shouted, demanded she explain how she could lie like that. But I'd spent enough years raising my voice just to be ignored. This time, I'd answer differently. I opened my notebook, the one I'd been filling with everything, every bill I'd paid, every promise I'd kept, every time I'd stayed silent so they could shine. I flipped to a blank page and started listing what I knew. Tax returns showing my income covering the mortgage, the cars, the kids' tuition, receipts for her mother's medical bills I'd settled without a word. Emails where I'd agreed to loans for Corey's startup ideas that never went anywhere. I had folders of it all, digital and paper, tucked away in a cloud drive, in a box under the bed. I wasn't a lawyer, but I learned a long time ago to keep records, to hold on to proof even when I hoped I'd never need it. Now, I did. I spent the morning digging through it all, sorting files on my laptop, pulling papers from the box. Each one was a piece of the life I'd built, a life they'd leaned on without seeing. By noon, my desk was covered spreadsheets, statements, screenshots of text where she'd thanked me for handling things, then turned around and mocked me to her friends. I didn't feel sorry for myself, not anymore. I felt awake, like I was finally seeing the board I'd been playing on, and it was time to make a move. I searched online for a lawyer in the area, someone who could handle this without turning it into a circus. I found Marcus Caldwell, a guy with a small office an hour away, good reviews, and a no-nonsense vibe. I called, got his secretary, and set an appointment for the next day. She didn't ask why, and I didn't offer. That afternoon, I drove to meet him, Max riding shotgun in the old truck I'd bought cheap off a guy in town. The road wound through the mountains, trees flashing by in a blur of green and gold. Marcus's office was plain. A brick building with a single sign, no fancy glass or marble. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with a handshake that said he meant business. I sat across from him, handed over the letter, and laid out the basics. Not the emotions, just the facts. I told him about the marriage, the kids, the money, the way I'd left. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend I was a saint. He listened, jotting notes, his face calm but focused, like he was piecing together a puzzle. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You've got a case. She's reaching, but we need to counter hard. You got proof." I slid the folder across the desk, tax returns, bank statements, everything I'd pulled together. He flipped through it, nodded once, and said, "This'll do." We talked strategy, but I kept it simple. No alimony, no games, just a clean break. I didn't want to drag it out, didn't want to hurt anyone more than I had to. But I wasn't going to let her walk away with a story that erased me. Marcus agreed, said he'd draft a response and file it by the end of the week. I left his office feeling lighter, not because it was over, but because I'd started something that said I wasn't invisible anymore. On the drive back, Max hung his head out the window, tongue flapping, and I let the radio play low, some old country song about starting over. It fit. Back in my room, I sat with the letter again, reading her words one last time. Emotional abandonment. Funny how she could twist it like that, when I'd been the one begging for a scrap of respect, a moment where I wasn't the punchline. I didn't hate her, not really. I just didn't know her anymore. Not the woman who'd laughed with me years ago, who'd held my hand when things got tough. That person was gone, or maybe I'd imagined her. I put the letter in the box with the rest, locked it away, and opened my notebook. I wrote about today, the lawyer, the files, the drive through the hills. I wrote about how it felt to fight back, not with yelling or fists, but with truth, cold and clear as the morning fog. I leaned back, Max snoring at my feet, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Outside, the hills were dark, the stars sharp against the sky. I didn't know what came next, didn't know how she'd react or what the kids would think. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting for their permission to matter. I'd started building something new, not a wall, not a cage, but a line. A line that said I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere until I was ready. I was sitting at the desk in my room above the bookstore, the late afternoon light slanting through the window, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail. Max was sprawled on the rug, his tail twitching in his sleep, and the quiet of Marlowe Ridge wrapped around me like a blanket. I'd gotten used to the stillness here, the way the days moved slow and steady, no one demanding my time or attention. But that buzz cut through it, sharp and insistent. I picked up the phone, saw Corey's name on the screen, and felt a jolt, not anger, not dread, but something heavier, like the weight of years pressing down. My son, the one who'd called me old-fashioned last summer, who'd brushed off my advice like it was dust, had left a message. I stared at the notification for a long moment, my thumb hovering, before I pressed play. His voice came through, shaky, not like the cocky kid I'd last seen at my birthday party. "Dad, it's me. Things are bad here. Mom's losing it, yelling all the time. Zeke moved in, and they fight every day loud, like they don't care who hears. The house is falling apart. The Wi-Fi's gone. The fridge is half empty. I think I understand now. I didn't see it before. I'm sorry." The message ended abruptly, like he'd run out of words or courage. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, and played it again. Then a third time. Each word landed like a stone, not because I was surprised, but because it was him, my boy, the one I'd carried on my shoulders, taught to throw a ball, driven to every practice even when he stopped saying thanks. My hands trembled, not from rage, but from something deeper, something I couldn't name. I set the phone down and leaned back, the chair creaking under me. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like the past was crowding in. I thought about Corey, 22 now, trying to hold things together in a house I'd walked away from. I pictured her, his mother, pacing the kitchen, her voice sharp like it got when she was cornered. And Zeke, my brother-in-law, crashing on their couch or worse, stirring up trouble like he always did. The Wi-Fi, the fridge, it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the life I'd propped up, the one they'd leaned on without noticing until it was gone. I'd stopped the payments, pulled my name from the accounts, not to hurt them, but to let them feel it, the weight I'd carried alone. Now they were feeling it, and Corey's voice told me he was starting to see. I got up, clipped Max's leash on, and headed out, needing to move, to let the hills pull me out of my head. The town was quiet, shops closing up, the sky turning pink at the edges. I walked past Rosie's diner, the neon sign flickering, and kept going toward the gravel path that wound into the trees. Max trotted ahead, sniffing at roots and rocks, his ears flopping like he didn't have a care in the world. I envied that. My mind kept circling back to the voicemail, to Corey's words. I didn't see it before. "I'm sorry." I wanted to believe him, wanted to think he meant it, but I'd heard apologies before. They were easy to say, harder to live. I'd spent years accepting them, fixing things, moving on. This time, I wasn't sure I could. I stopped at a clearing, the valley stretching out below, the fog settling like a soft veil. I sat on a stump, Max flopping beside me, and pulled out my notebook. It was always with me now, a place to put the things I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about the call, about Corey's voice, the way it cracked like he was carrying more than he knew how to hold. I wrote about the house, how I could picture it falling apart, not the walls or the roof, but the idea of it, the home I'd tried to build. I wrote about Zeke, his fights with her, how I wasn't surprised he'd swooped in, always sniffing around when things got tough. And I wrote about me, what it meant to hear my son say he understood, even if I wasn't ready to trust it. The pen moved fast, the words spilling out, messy but true. I didn't know what to do with them, didn't know if I'd ever show anyone. But they were mine, proof I was here, feeling it all. When I finished, my hand ached, and the light was fading, the hills turning purple under the dusk. I closed the notebook, tucked it away, and started back to town, Max's leash loose in my hand. The walk cleared my head, but it didn't answer the question circling me. What now? I could call him back, tell him I heard him, maybe even explain why I left. But I wasn't ready, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. I needed to know this wasn't just a moment, a reflex because things were hard. Back in my room, I sat at the desk, the lamp casting a warm glow over the wood. Max curled up by the heater, his snores filling the quiet. I picked up the phone, listened to the voicemail one more time, letting Corey's words sink in. Then I opened a new message and typed, "I'm okay. I'm listening." I hit send before I could second-guess it, set the phone down, and leaned back. It wasn't a promise, wasn't a fix, It was just a door cracked open, enough to let him know I hadn't shut him out. I didn't know if he'd write back, didn't know if he'd call again. But for now, it was enough. I opened my notebook again, not to write, but to read what I'd put down since I got here. All the pieces of a life I was starting to understand. The sacrifices, the silence, the crown they'd laughed about. It was all there, not as a weight anymore, but as a map, showing me where I'd been and why I'd left. I closed it, locked it in the drawer, and got up to make some tea, the kettle's hum blending with the night. Outside, the stars were bright, the hills dark and steady. I stood by the window, cup warm in my hands, and felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of strength, quiet and sure. I'd answered Corey, not because he'd asked, but because I chose to. And that choice, small as it was, felt like mine in a way nothing had for years. I was outside Rosie's diner, tossing a stick for Max in the gravel lot, when I heard the crunch of tires pulling in. The air was damp, a light rain spitting from the gray sky, and I figured it was just another local grabbing coffee or a late lunch. Max bounded after the stick, his tail wagging like he hadn't a care, and I was about to call him back when I saw her. Mia, my daughter, stepping out of a beat-up sedan I didn't recognize. She stood there, hoodie-soaked, hands stuffed in her pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. My heart caught, not in a soft way, but like a gear slipping, jarring me out of the quiet I'd built here in Marlow Ridge. I hadn't expected her, hadn't expected anyone, and the sight of her standing by that truck hit me harder than I was ready for. I walked over, Max trotting beside me, his ears perked at the new arrival. She didn't move at first, just watched me, her eyes searching like she wasn't sure I was real. "Mia," I said, keeping my voice steady, though it felt like a question. She nodded, quick and awkward, then glanced at Max, who wagged his tail but stayed close. "I didn't tell Mom," she said, her words rushing out. "I just needed to see you." There was no script for this, no plan in my head for what to say to my 19-year-old daughter showing up unannounced after I'd left without a goodbye. I nodded toward the diner. "Come on, let's get out of the rain." We walked up the steps to my room above the bookstore, Max leading the way, his nails clicking on the wood. The place felt smaller with her in it. Books stacked high on the desk, a half-done puzzle on the table, a mug I hadn't washed sitting by the sink. She looked around, not judging, just taking it in, her eyes lingering on the view of the hills through the window. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, handed it to her, and she dried her hair, the silence between us heavy but not tense. Max flopped by the heater, his sigh breaking the quiet, and I motioned for her to sit on the bed while I took the chair. "How'd you find me?" I asked, keeping it light, though I already guessed Corey's call last week. My short reply, probably enough for her to piece it together. She shrugged, twisting the towel in her hands. "Asked around. Said I was looking for a guy with a dog named Max wasn't hard." I almost smiled at that. Small towns don't keep secrets well, but I wasn't hiding, not really. I waited, letting her find her words, knowing she'd come all this way for a reason. She looked down, her voice soft. "This place feels more like home than our house ever did." It wasn't what I expected, and it landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't say anything, just watched her, waiting for the rest. She took a breath, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. "We made you invisible, Dad. Me, Corey, Mom, everyone. I didn't see it till you were gone." Her words hung there, raw and true, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I'd spent years hoping someone would notice, would see the man behind the paychecks and the fixes, but hearing it now didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, like carrying a truth I wasn't sure what to do with. I nodded, slow, letting her know I heard her. "Took a lot to come here," I said, my voice low, not pushing, just acknowledging. She bit her lip, nodded back, and for a moment, we just sat there, the rain tapping the window, Max's soft snores filling the space. It was the kind of quiet I'd come to love here, but with her in it, it felt different, fragile, like it could break if I said the wrong thing. She started talking then, not all at once, but in pieces, like she was sorting it out as she went. She told me about the house, how it was chaos since I left, how her mom was angry all the time, how Zeke's presence made it worse. She said Corey was trying to hold things together, but he didn't know how, not like I did. "It's like we didn't know how much you did until it stopped," she said, her voice cracking. I listened, not interrupting, letting her lay it out. She wasn't asking for me to fix it, wasn't begging me to come back, just telling me, like she needed me to know. And I did. I saw it in her eyes, the way they carried guilt and something else, maybe love, maybe just the start of understanding. I got up, poured her some tea from the kettle I kept on the dresser, handed her the mug. She wrapped her hands around it, the steam curling up, and I sat back down, giving her space. "Why now?" I asked, not accusing, just curious. She looked at me, her eyes steady now. "Because I kept thinking about your birthday, that stupid crown." We laughed, Dad. I laughed. And now I can't stop seeing it, how it must have felt. I swallowed, my throat tight, not because I was angry, but because she saw it, really saw it, when I thought no one ever would. I didn't say anything, just nodded again, letting her know it landed. She stayed for an hour, maybe more, the conversation slow, careful, like we were both learning how to talk again. She told me about school, how she was thinking of switching majors, how she missed Max more than she expected. I told her about the town, the diner, the way the hills looked at dawn. I didn't talk about why I left, didn't lay out the years of silence. She didn't need that, not now. When she stood to leave, the rain had stopped, the sky clearing to a soft gray. "Are you coming back?" she asked, her voice small, not demanding, just hoping. I looked at her, my daughter, standing there with wet sneakers and a question I couldn't answer. "I don't know," I said, honest. "I'm not done yet." She nodded, like she understood, or at least wanted to. I walked her to the truck, Max trailing us, and she hugged me quick, tight, like she was afraid I'd vanish again. I hugged her back, feeling her shoulders, so much like her mother's but softer, younger. She climbed into the sedan, waved once, and drove off, the tires crunching on the gravel. I stood there, Max at my side, watching until the taillights disappeared around the bend. The air was cool, the hills quiet, but inside me, something stirred, not peace, not pain, but a crack in the wall I'd built. I went back upstairs, opened my notebook, and wrote it all down, her words, her eyes, the way it felt to hear I wasn't invisible to her, not anymore. I locked it away, turned off the lamp, and sat by the window, the stars sharp against the night, knowing I wasn't ready to go back. But maybe, just maybe, I was starting to heal. I stood in the courtroom, the air heavy with the smell of polished wood and stale coffee, my old tie pulling tight against my throat. It was 3 months since I'd left home, and Marlow Ridge had started to feel like a place I could stay. But today I was back in the city, facing the life I'd walked away from. The judge's bench loomed at the front, a flag hanging limp beside it, and the room buzzed with low voices, lawyers shuffling papers, a clerk typing, people shifting in their seats. I adjusted my jacket, the one I'd pressed last night in my motel room, and glanced at Marcus, my lawyer, who sat beside me, calm as ever, his briefcase open with files neatly stacked. Across the aisle, she sat, dressed in black like she was at a funeral, her eyes fixed forward, avoiding mine. I didn't look long, just enough to know she was playing a part, same as always. The hearing was for the separation, the alimony she'd demanded, the claim she'd made about me abandoning her and the kids. I wasn't nervous, not the way I thought I'd be. Maybe it was the months of quiet in Marlow Ridge, the walks with Max, the notebook where I'd written it all down, every truth I'd swallowed, every dollar I'd spent to keep them afloat. I'd handed Marcus everything, bank statements, tax returns, receipts, even screenshots of texts where she dismissed me while asking for more. He'd nodded when I gave him the folder, said it was enough to bury her case, but I didn't want to bury her. I just wanted out, clean and fair, with the truth laid bare for once. The judge called us to order, a woman with gray hair and a voice that cut through the room like a knife. She didn't waste time, asking her lawyer to start. He stood, a guy in a slick suit who talked like he'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. He painted a picture of me as a ghost, a man who'd walked out without warning, left his family struggling, shirked his duties. Emotional abandonment, he called it, leaning hard on the words, saying I'd been distant for years, contributing nothing but a paycheck, and even that I'd cut off. He gestured toward her, sitting straight, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, the perfect image of a woman wronged. I watched the judge, her face unreadable, and wondered how many times she'd seen this act before. When it was Marcus's turn, he didn't raise his voice or pace like some courtroom showman. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and started laying it out, piece by piece, like he was building a house no one could knock down. He showed my pay stubs, proving I'd covered the mortgage, utilities, tuition, even her mother's medical bills. He pulled up bank transfers, every one signed by me, keeping the lights on, the cars running, the kids in school. He read texts, not the cruel ones, but the ones where I'd agreed to pay for Corey's car repairs, Mia's textbooks, her spa weekends with friends. He didn't linger, Didn't dramatize, just let the numbers and words do the talking. I sat there, my hands folded, feeling the room shift, like the air itself was starting to see me. Then Marcus held up the crown, the glittery paper one from my birthday, the words King of Letdowns and Disappointments scrawled in her handwriting. He'd kept it in a plastic sleeve, like evidence from a crime scene, and I thought it was overkill when he asked to bring it. But now I saw why. This was a gift, he said, his voice steady. Given to my client on his 50th birthday, in front of his family and friends. A joke, they called it, but it speaks to the environment he lived in. A man who provided everything, yet was mocked for it. He paused, letting the judge take it in, letting the room feel the weight. My client didn't abandon his family. He stopped performing in a circus where he was the clown everyone laughed at. The courtroom went still, not a cough or a shuffle, just silence thick enough to choke on. I didn't look at her, didn't need to. I could feel her stiffen across the aisle, the tissue forgotten in her hand. The judge leaned forward, her eyes on Marcus, then me, like she was seeing me for the first time. I kept my face blank, not smug or angry, just there, letting the truth stand on its own. Marcus sat down, his job done, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but a kind of space, like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally let it go. Her lawyer tried to push back, stammering about emotional neglect, about how money wasn't love, but it sounded weak, like he knew the ground was slipping. The judge cut him off, asked a few questions, sharp, direct, about timelines and accounts. Marcus answered with dates and numbers, every one backed by the folder I'd given him. She didn't have much to say, just nodded when her lawyer whispered to her, her face tight, no more tears. The judge took it all in, her pen scratching notes, and then she called a recess, saying she'd rule after lunch. We filed out, Marcus clapping my shoulder, saying we'd done well. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and stepped outside for air. The city felt loud, cars honking, people rushing past, nothing like the quiet of Marlow Ridge. I leaned against a bench, the cool metal grounding me, and thought about that crown, those words, how they'd laughed. Marcus was right, it wasn't just a joke. It was a window into everything I'd let slide, everything I'd thought was normal. I didn't feel sorry for myself, not anymore. I felt awake, like I'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. When we went back in, the judge didn't drag it out. She ruled, no alimony, property split 70-30 in my favor, her claims dismissed. She didn't lecture, didn't linger, just gave her decision and moved on, like it was obvious. I walked out, Marcus beside me, the courthouse doors swinging shut behind us. The sky was gray, a light drizzle starting, but I didn't mind. I thanked him, shook his hand, and headed to my truck, the one I'd driven from Marlow Ridge. Inside, I sat for a minute, the keys cold in my hand, the folder of papers on the seat beside me. I didn't feel like celebrating, didn't feel like crying, just felt done, like I'd closed a book I'd been stuck in too long. I started the engine, the rumble steady under me, and drove back to the hills, to Max, to the life I was building, one where I didn't have to prove I was enough. The road stretched out, the city fading in the rearview, and for the first time, I didn't look back. I was standing outside the courthouse, the drizzle soaking into my jacket, when she caught up to me. The ruling had just come down. No alimony, most of the property in my favor. Her claims tossed out like yesterday's news. I'd walked out feeling lighter, not because I'd won, but because it was over, or close to it. The city hummed around me, cars sloshing through wet streets, people ducking under umbrellas, but I was already thinking of Marlow Ridge, of Max waiting for me, of the quiet I'd carved out there. Then I heard her voice, sharp and close, cutting through the noise. You made me look like the villain. I turned, and there she was, standing a few feet away, her black dress damp, her face tight with something that wasn't quite anger, more like desperation, like she'd lost control of the story she'd been telling herself. I met her eyes, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Not the woman I'd married, not the one I'd laughed with in our 20s, but the one standing here now, blaming me for the mirror Marcus held up in that courtroom. You didn't need help with that, I said, my voice low, not cruel, just true. She flinched, like I'd slapped her, and for a second, I thought she'd argue, yell, do what she always did when things didn't go her way. But she just stood there, rain streaking her makeup, her hands clenched at her sides. I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked to my truck, the keys heavy in my pocket, leaving her in the wet city I was done with. The drive back to Marlow Ridge took hours, the road winding through hills that turned gold under the clearing sky. I didn't play the radio, didn't need it, just let the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the wipers fill the space. I thought about her words, how she'd try to flip it, make it my fault she'd come out looking small. I didn't hate her, didn't even want her to hurt, not really. I just wanted her to see it, to live with the truth of what she'd done, what they'd all done, laughing at me while I held everything together. By the time I pulled into town, the rain had stopped, and the hills glowed soft, like they were welcoming me back. I got to the bookstore, climbed the stairs to my room, and found Max waiting, his tail thumping against the floor. I scratched his ears, let him lick my hand, and felt the weight of the day start to lift. I sat at the desk, opened my notebook, and wrote about it. The courthouse, her words, the way it felt to walk away without apologizing. I didn't linger on it, just put it down, locked the drawer, and moved on. That's what I was learning here. How to let things be, how to stop carrying what wasn't mine. A few days later, I got a text from Corey, short and practical, asking about his car payment. I'd been covering it for years, ever since he got that beat-up sedan he swore he'd fix up. I stared at the message, remembering his voicemail, the way he'd sounded like he was starting to get it. I didn't want to cut him off, not like I had with the house, but I needed him to step up. I wrote back, "Last payment's on me. Handle it from here." He replied quick, "Just okay, I will." "Thanks, Dad." No excuses, no whining. I leaned back, a small nod to myself. It wasn't much, but it was something, a sign he might be growing into the man I'd hoped he'd be. Mia called a week later, not asking for anything, just wanting to talk. I was outside Rosie's, sipping coffee, Max sprawled in the sun, when my phone rang. Her voice was lighter than when she'd shown up in the rain, like she was testing the waters, seeing if I'd still listen. She told me about school, a professor who annoyed her, a concert she'd gone to with friends. I listened, asked a few questions, let her fill the space. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "You know, Dad, you were never a letdown. You were the glue." I froze, the coffee halfway to my mouth, her words hitting like a wave I didn't see coming. I didn't say much, just a quiet, "Thanks, kid." But inside, it was like something cracked open, not enough to spill, but enough to let light in. I didn't cry, though I came close, closer than I had in years. I sat there after we hung up, watching the hills turn purple as the sun dipped low, Max snoring beside me. I thought about what she'd said, how it felt to hear it, not because I needed her to say it, but because it meant she saw me, really saw me, maybe for the first time. I didn't call her back, didn't need to. I just let it sit, let it be true without picking it apart. That's what Marlow Ridge was teaching me, how to take a moment and not owe anyone an explanation for it. I went back to my room, made some tea, and sat by the window, the stars sharp against the night. I thought about Corey, Mia, even her, how they were starting to feel the shape of what I'd been, what I'd done. I didn't want apologies, didn't want them to grovel. I wanted them to live with it, to carry their own choices like I'd carried mine. I opened my notebook, not to write, but to read, flipping through pages of everything I'd put down since I got here, the crown, the silence, the years I'd thought were love but were something else. It wasn't a story of failure anymore, not to me. It was a story of waking up, of choosing to matter. I locked the notebook away, turned off the lamp, and stood by the window a while longer. The hills were dark, the town quiet, just a few lights flickering in the distance. I thought about Mia's words again. You were the glue, and let them settle, not as a weight, but as a truth I could hold without breaking. I wasn't going back, not yet, maybe not ever. But I wasn't running either. I was here, in this small room, with a dog who trusted me and a life I was building, piece by piece, where I didn't have to prove I was enough. I climbed into bed, Max curling up at my feet, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming of the past, just the hills, the stars, and a quiet that felt like mine. I was tinkering with an old radio in the back of the repair shop, the hum of Marlow Ridge's morning settling around me like a familiar song, when I realized I'd stopped waiting for something to pull me back. It had been months since the courthouse, since I'd faced her and walked away, since Mia's words about me being the glue had cracked something open inside me. The shop smelled of solder and dust, a small space crammed with tools and half-fixed gadgets, and I liked it here, liked the focus it demanded, the way a broken thing could come alive again if you took the time to understand it. I'd started working for Gus, the owner, a gruff guy who didn't care about my past as long as I could strip a wire and keep the coffee pot full. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was enough. I lived simple now. Morning started with a walk through the hills, Max trotting beside me, his nose low to catch every scent the fog carried. The air was sharp, the kind that woke you up without trying, and I'd watch the sun climb over the ridges, painting them gold before the town stirred. I'd stop at Rosie's for coffee, black and burnt just the way I liked it, and read a paperback from Russell's bookstore, the pages soft from years of hands. My room above the shop stayed the same: bed, desk, a stack of books, a puzzle I never seemed to finish. Max's water bowl sat by the heater, his leash hung on a hook by the door. It wasn't a big life, but it was one I'd chosen, one where I didn't have to shrink to fit. I fixed things. Radios, laptops, even a toaster once, though Gus laughed when I brought it back to life. The work suited me, steady and quiet, no one breathing down my neck or laughing when I turned away. People in town knew me now, not as the guy who'd run from something, but as the one who'd show up with a screwdriver and patience. They'd nod at me in the diner, call out "Morning, Mal," when I passed the hardware store. I didn't talk much, didn't need to. I'd learned silence could be strength, not just a place to hide. Every day felt like a step further from the man who'd worn that glittery crown, who'd grilled burgers while they laughed at his expense. One evening, Mia showed up again, this time planned, not like the rainy day she'd surprised me. I was on the porch outside my room, a rickety thing overlooking the street, when her car pulled up, dust kicking around the tires. She climbed out, a paper bag in her arms, her smile shy but real. "Brought you something," she said, holding it out. I took it, peeked inside, and smelled cobbler. Peach, warm, the kind she used to help me make when she was little. I gestured to the chair beside me, an old wooden one I'd fixed up, and she sat, pulling her jacket tight against the evening chill. Max thumped his tail, too lazy to get up, but happy she was here. We didn't talk at first, just sat watching the hills turn purple, the sky streaked with gold as the sun sank. The cobbler sat between us, a quiet gift, and I felt her presence. Not heavy, not demanding, just there, like she wanted to be near me without asking for anything. I broke the silence, keeping it light. "You drive all this way just to feed me?" She laughed, soft, and shook her head. "Maybe. Figured you might miss it." I nodded, took a bite, the sweetness hitting me like a memory of summers when she'd sit on the counter, sneaking peach slices while I stirred. It was good, better than I expected, and I told her so. Her smile grew, like she'd been waiting for that. We talked then, not about the past, not about the house or her mom or the mess I'd left behind. She told me about school, how she'd switched to an art major, how it scared her but felt right. I told her about the shop, about a radio I'd fixed that played songs from the 40s, about Max chasing a squirrel and losing spectacularly. It was easy, the kind of talk I hadn't had with her in years, maybe ever. I didn't push, didn't ask what she wanted or why she'd come. I just listened, let her words fill the space, let her know I was here. When the air turned cold, she stood, brushing crumbs off her jeans. "You think you'll ever come back?" she asked, her voice soft, not pressing, just wondering. I looked out at the hills, their edges soft in the dusk, and felt the question settle. I'd asked myself the same thing, late at night when the quiet got loud, but the answer was clearer now. "I'm already home," I said, not sharp, just sure. She nodded, like she'd expected it, like she understood even if it wasn't what she hoped. She hugged me before she left, longer than last time, her arms tight around my shoulders. I hugged her back, feeling her warmth, her strength, and let her go without holding on too long. She drove off, taillights fading, and I stood there, Max at my feet, the cobbler's sweetness still on my tongue. I went inside, sat at the desk, and opened my notebook, not to write, but to think. I'd stopped adding to it as much, not because I had less to say, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The pages held it all, the crown, the laughter, the years I'd thought were love but were something less. They weren't a weight now, just a record, a way to remember I'd come through. I locked it away, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window, the stars bright above the hills. Mia's question lingered, not as doubt, but as a marker of where I was, here, in a town that didn't ask me to be anyone but myself, with a life that fit me better than the one I'd left. I thought about home, not the house full of noise and expectations, but this, a porch where I could sit with my daughter, a shop where I could fix what was broken, a dog who trusted me to come back. Home wasn't a place you owed someone, not a debt you paid with silence. It was a space where you mattered, where you could breathe without checking if someone approved. I'd found it here, in the fog, in the hills, in the work, in the quiet. I didn't know what came next, didn't need to. I was here, and for the first time, that was enough.